Guards, take her. Place her in chains.
No, please! My lord, I beg you!
Move!
Take hold of her! No! Let me go!
The king raised his hand to have the poor girl dragged away in chains. Her crime, one broken jar and empty pockets. Then the sun caught her open palm, and the king went completely still. On her hand was a scar he had seen only once before. 20 years ago, on the night the palace burned. The night the palace burned and everything he loved disappeared. And now that scar was standing in the middle of the market, alive, looking straight at him. The clay jar hit the stones and burst apart like something alive. Red oil spread across the market floor. The crowd went silent. Somewhere behind the stalls a goat cried out, and then even the goat stopped. The jar had come from the royal household. Everyone knew it by the gold thread wrapped around its neck, and the girl standing over the pieces was nobody barefoot. Thin, a torn wrap the color of dust, hands shaking so hard she could not lift them. King Nathaniel stepped down from his horse. He smelled the spilled oil, sharp and warm in the noon heat. He saw the girl's ribs through her clothing. He saw the crowd bending low around him, waiting to see what he would do. And he made a decision he would spend the rest of his life trying to undo. "Thief," he said. One word, loud enough for the whole market to hear. The girl did not run. She only lifted her head. And that was the moment everything changed. Before we continue, please like this video and subscribe so you never miss a story. And tell us in the comments where you are watching us from. King Nathaniel had ruled for 22 years, and for 20 of them he had not slept a full night. His palace sat above the river, white stone and high windows, with gardens where fig trees dropped fruit nobody bothered to collect. He owned 300 horses. He owned the road the market stood on. When he traveled, drums went before him so the poor would know to move aside. But every room in that palace had a door he would not open. The east wing had been closed for 20 years. The nursery was in the east wing. The fire had started in the nursery, in the winter of his 2nd year as king. And by morning his infant daughter was gone, and his wife was screaming in a voice he still heard sometimes when the wind moved through the corridors. His wife died the following spring. The physicians called it fever. Nathaniel knew better. Grief has its own name, and everyone agrees to call it something else. So he ruled. He was fair, mostly. He was hard, often. And he had become the kind of man who could look at a starving girl and see a criminal, because it was easier than looking at her and seeing a child. The girl on the market stones was called Grace. She was 19. She lived at the edge of the fishing quarter in one room with a roof that leaked in 3 places, and she shared it with the old woman who had raised her. She carried water in the morning for a coin, swept the fish market at midday for another, and in the evening she carried jars for whoever would pay her, which is how she came to be holding a royal jar she had no business holding. She had eaten twice in 3 days. Her hands had been shaking before the jar ever left them. But here is what the crowd did not know about Grace, and what the king could not have guessed. She gave away more than she kept. The widow 2 doors down ate because Grace shared. The boy with the bad leg had shoes because Grace sold her own blanket in the cold season. She did not talk about it. She simply did it, the way some people simply breathe. And on her right palm, running from the base of her thumb across to her wrist, was a scar. It was older than her memory of it, shaped strangely, almost like a curved leaf, the skin raised and pale against the brown of her hand. The old woman who raised her had told her she'd been burned as a baby. When Grace asked how, or where, or whose fault it had been, the old woman would go quiet and find something that needed doing in another part of the room. Grace had stopped asking at around age 12. She had not stopped wondering. And in the palace, in a high room with a lock on the inside, a woman named Lady Constance kept a small iron box that she had not opened in 19 years. Inside was the small iron box he had seen years before. He broke the lock. The box held a scorched strip of the baby's blanket, a tiny brass leaf clasp, and a folded scrap in Constance's handwriting. The child must remain outside the palace. Nathaniel read it twice. The box was no longer an old secret. It was evidence. She was the king's late wife's elder sister. She managed the household, the accounts, the servants, and though no one said it aloud, She managed the king. Every petition that reached him passed through her hands first. Every visitor was announced by her, or not announced at all. She had a son named Harrison. He was 24, handsome, useless, and with the king's only child dead. First in line to the throne, Lady Constance had spent 20 years making very sure of that. "Thief!" the king said again. Grace lifted her head. "I am not my king." Her voice was thin, but it did not shake. That surprised him. People shook when he spoke to them. It was one of the things he had stopped noticing about his own life. The jar is royal property. "It is. I was carrying it for the oil merchant Dawit, who was carrying it for your kitchens. He paid me half a coin. I have the half coin. I have nothing else." She opened her hands to show him. "If you search me, you will find nothing, because there is nothing to find." A murmur went through the crowd. Someone laughed. Nervous, ugly, and King Nathaniel, who was tired and hot and had been arguing with his council since dawn, did the thing that powerful men do when they are embarrassed by their own smallness. He made it worse. "Look at her," he said to the crowd, and he let his voice carry. "This is what steals from a king. Bare feet, empty belly, no name worth speaking." He turned back to Grace. "You will pay for the jar. I cannot. Then you will work until you have—" "For how long, my king?" Nathaniel opened his mouth to answer, and Grace, still kneeling, still steady, raised her scarred right hand to shield her eyes from the sun so she could see his face when he sentenced her. The sun struck her open palm, and the king saw the scar. Time stopped. The world stopped. Everything stopped. He did not hear the crowd. He did not hear his own guard asking him a question twice, then 3 times. He was not in the market anymore. He was standing in a corridor 20 years ago, with smoke in his throat, holding a bundle of cloth that a physician was gently, insistently, trying to take out of his arms. He had seen that shape before. That curved leaf, not a wound, a burn from a lamp that had fallen and caught the edge of a crib, and a small hand that had reached toward it before anyone could stop it. He had seen it 3 days before the fire. He had kissed it. He had laughed about it with his wife, because the baby had been so offended, so furious about it, that she had cried herself to sleep on his chest. "Where?" said King Nathaniel, and his voice came out wrong. "Did you get that scar?" The whole market heard the change in him. The guard heard it. The oil merchant heard it and went pale for reasons of his own. Grace looked at her own hand as if she had never seen it. "I have had it since I was a baby, my king. I don't know how. Who told you that?" "The woman who raised me." "What is her name?" "Ruth," Grace said. "Her name is Ruth." And King Nathaniel took 1 step backward, because 20 years ago the nursemaid who had died in the nursery fire, the loyal woman whose body they never properly recovered, the woman he had ordered a stone carved for, had been named Ruth. He did not arrest Grace. He did something far stranger, and the market talked about it for a month afterward. The king of the river country knelt down on the dirty stones in his good clothes, in front of everyone, and picked up the pieces of the broken jar with his own hands. "Go home," he told her quietly. "Tell no one what I asked you. Do you understand? No one." "Yes, my king." "And Grace." He stopped. He had not asked her name. He realized he had not asked her name, and that he had somehow known it anyway, and that this frightened him more than anything else that had happened. "Yet, lock your door tonight." The king did not go back to his council. He went to the east wing. The door had been sealed with wax and a wooden bar, and the wax was so old it crumbled like bread. Inside, the air was thick and cold and smelled of char that 20 years had not lifted. Ash still lay in the corners in soft gray drifts. His boots left prints in it. He stood in the doorway of the nursery for a long time. Then he made himself walk in and look at the place where the crib had been, and what he saw stopped him again, because a man does not forget the shape of the worst room of his life, and this room was wrong. The fire had burned outward from the window wall. Not the lamp corner. The lamp had stood on the opposite side. By the crib, he had been told for 20 years that a lamp fell, that a nursemaid was careless, that a baby died, and a servant died with her. But fire climbs from where it starts, and the black on these walls climbed from the window. Somebody had started that fire from outside the crib. Deliberately. Where the child was not, he found the second thing under the collapsed shelf, wedged where the beam had fallen and protected it. A corner of a baby's blanket, scorched black at one edge, the rest of it preserved. He knew the cloth. His wife had woven the border herself, badly, laughing at how bad it was in the last month before the birth. Gold thread on cream, an uneven line of leaves. He turned it over. The blanket had been cut, not burned through, cut with a blade in a clean straight line, as though someone had wrapped a child in half of it and left the other half behind to burn. King Nathaniel sat down on the floor of the room where his daughter had died and understood, all at once, that his daughter had not died in that room. He did not weep. That would come later. What he felt first was something colder and much more useful. He wanted names. "Bring me Samuel," he told his steward that evening. "The old guard. The one with the bad shoulder. If Eth dead, bring me his sons." Samuel was not dead. He was 71 and half blind, living behind the stables, and when he was brought into the king's private chamber and saw the cut blanket lying on the table, he began to cry before a single question was asked. "Sit down," Nathaniel said. "My king, sit down, Samuel, and tell me what you saw the night of the fire." The old man sat. His hands moved on his knees, like they were looking for something to hold. "I have wanted to say it for 20 years, he said. "I have said it to my wife. I have said it to God. I have never once said it out loud where it could do any good. And I am ashamed. My king, I am so ashamed. Say it now. I was on the east door that night. Before the smoke, before anyone called fire, I saw Lady Constance come out of the east wing carrying a bundle in both arms. Held close. Held like he stopped. Held like a child is held. My king. Not like cloth. Not like goods. I know the difference. You are certain it was her." She looked directly at me. Samuel's voice cracked. She looked directly at me, and she said, "You did not see me, Samuel. You have a family." And then she walked out through the kitchen gate, and 8 minutes later the bell rang for fire. Nathaniel's jaw worked. "Why did you never speak?" "Because 2 weeks later my brother's house burned down." The old man said simply, "Nobody was hurt." It was a warning, and I understood it. "I have 3 sons, my king. I chose my sons. God forgive me. I chose my sons." The king was quiet for a long moment. "You are not the guilty one in this room's story," he said finally. "Go home, Samuel. Speak to no one. I will send for you again. And when either, you will say all of this in front of people who matter. Can you do that?" "Yes, my king. Even if you are afraid." "Especially then," the old man said. "I have been afraid for 20 years. It has bought me nothing but a bad shoulder, and worst I hear is a thing about Grace that the king did not know yet." That same night, while he was tearing his own palace open, she was sitting on the floor of a one-room house in the fishing quarter, with her head against the knee of an old woman, the way she had sat since she was small. "You are quiet tonight," Ruth said. "The king called me a thief today." The old woman's hand went still in Grace's hair. "He asked about my scar," Grace said. "He asked who raised me. I told him your name." The room was so quiet Grace could hear the sea. "Mama Ruth, you should sleep, child. You always say that when I ask you something you don't want to answer." Ruth laughed. One small, broken sound, not really a laugh at all. Her hands started moving again, slower. "When you were a baby," she said, "you cried for 11 nights without stopping. 11. I thought you would tear yourself apart. And then on the 12th night you slept, and I sat and watched you breathe until the sun came up, and I made a promise." She paused. "I have kept that promise for 20 years. I am very tired." "Grace?" "What promise?" "That whatever it costs me, you would live." Grace sat up. "That is not an answer." "No," Ruth agreed. "It is not." and she would say nothing more. And Grace lay awake half the night listening to the old woman not sleeping either, on the other side of the room. The king found the motive 3 days later in the household ledgers, and it was so plain that he was sick with it. Lady Constance had been paying a sum out of the household accounts every quarter for 19 years. The line item was written in her own hand: charitable maintenance, fishing quarter, small enough that no auditor would ever ask, consistent enough that it had never once been missed. 19 years of paying somebody in the fishing quarter to stay exactly where they were. Not to disappear. To stay. To be findable. To be watched. And beneath it, in the same ledger, in the same hand, the succession record, with the king's daughter dead and no other issue. The line passed to the king's late wife's sister's issue. To Harrison, his nephew, a young man who had been raised his whole life, being told the throne was coming to him by a mother who had made very certain it would. Nathaniel sat with the ledger open in front of him until the candles burned down, and then he did something he had not done in 20 years. He laughed. It was not a good sound. She did not even hide it well, he said to the empty room. She hid it under my own signature. He went down to the kitchens after midnight because he could not be in that room any more. The night cook was banking the fires and nearly dropped a pan at the sight of him. The king, alone, in his shirt sleeves. At that hour, "Sit," Nathaniel said. "Please, I only want to be somewhere warm where nobody is deciding anything." So the old cook sat and said nothing, and the king sat across from her on a flour sack and watched the coals settle. And the room smelled of bread and wood smoke. And it was the first thing in 4 days that had not hurt. "Do you have children?" he asked eventually. "6, my king. 4 living." "Do you know where they are tonight?" "Every one," she said. "2 streets apart. I could walk it blind." Nathaniel nodded slowly. He sat with that for a while. "That is the wealthiest thing anyone has said to me in 20 years, he said, and he went back up the stairs to finish reading. He summoned her the next morning. He meant to end it there, one confrontation, one confession, done. Lady Constance came in, composed, in grey, smelling faintly of the dried lavender she kept in her sleeves. She looked at the cut blanket on the table. She looked at the ledger. She did not blink. "You have been in the East Wing," she said. "You should not go in there. It disturbs you. Sit down, Constance." She sat. "My daughter did not die in that fire." "Your daughter," Lady Constance said gently, "is buried in the royal ground under a white stone. And I stood beside you when they laid her there. You have not been sleeping. I have told you for years that you do not sleep. There is a girl in the market with the burn on her hand. There are 1,000 girls in that market, and half of them are burned. They cook over open fire. Nathaniel, they are poor." She let that sit. Then, softer, more terribly, "You are looking for her in strangers' faces. You have done it before. Do you remember the fisherman's daughter, 6 years ago? You had her brought to the palace. You frightened that child badly, and then you wept for a week. I am not going to watch you do that again." And here was the thing that made her dangerous. Some of it was true. He had done it before. He had chased ghosts before. She had held him together after both times. And she was the only person alive who had... Then Lady Constance produced a document from her sleeve. The burial record, sealed, witnessed by the physician and the priest, dated the morning after the fire. She laid it on the table beside the cut blanket, and the two things sat there looking at each other. "Open the grave if you must," she said. "I will stand beside you while you do it, as I did the first time. And then I would like you to rest." For 1 full day, King Nathaniel believed her. That is the cruelty of a lie told for 20 years by someone who loves you badly. It fits the shape of your grief exactly. It was built, too. He opened the grave. He did it at dawn with 4 men and the priest. And the priest wept the entire time. And Lady Constance stood at the edge, with her hands folded in front of her, perfectly still, exactly as she had promised. The small box came up. Inside was a bundle of cloth, weighted with river stones, and half a baby's blanket with an uneven border of gold leaves. The cut edge matched the piece from the nursery exactly. Nathaniel knelt at the graveside for a long time. When he finally stood, he did not look at Constance at all. He looked at the priest. "Father, you sealed this record." The old priest's face had gone the color of paper. "My king, I sealed what I was shown. I did not open the box. God forgive me. No one opens the box. One never opens the who was in the room when it was sealed." The priest's eyes moved, once to Lady Constance, and Lady Constance, for the first time in 20 years, said absolutely nothing. The last piece came from Ruth, and it came because she brought it herself. She walked to the palace gate on her own feet that afternoon, an old woman in a clean wrap she had clearly saved for something, and she told the guard, "Tell the king the nursemaid he buried is standing outside, and she has finished being dead." They brought her to him in the small chamber. She would not sit. "I have rehearsed this for 20 years, she said. "So let me say it badly and quickly, or I will not say it at all. Say it." She woke me that night. Lady Constance, she had the child in her arms, and she said the palace was burning and I must run with the baby and never come back. And if I ever spoke a word, the child would be found and finished properly. Ruth's chin was shaking. I believed her. It was true that the palace was burning. She had said it herself, but I did not know that. I did not know that for years. I thought I was saving your daughter's life, my king. I thought I was the only one who could. And the money came every quarter. First year, I thought it was mercy. She laughed. That same broken sound Grace had heard. It was a leash. It came with a man who would stand in my doorway and count the coins slowly and ask how the child was growing. Every quarter. For 19 years. So that they would always know exactly where she was, and exactly how poor, and exactly how quiet I would stay. You could have come to me. Could I? Ruth said. Who announces visitors to the king? Who reads the petitions? Who decides which old women get to stand in this room? She spread her hands. I am standing here today only because you called for Samuel. And the whole palace is talking. And for the first time in 20 years she is too busy to watch the gate. Nathaniel sat down slowly. Why now? Because she has kept your daughter starving in a fish market to protect her son's inheritance, Ruth said. And last night that girl came home and told me the king had asked about her hand. And I understood that the day I have been dreading and praying for since she was 1 year old had finally come. She looked directly at him. I am not a good woman, my king. I took your child and I raised her in a leaking room, and I lied to her every day of her life. But I fed her before I fed myself, every single day, and she has grown up kind, which she did not get from me, and she did not get from you. And I will stand in front of any court in this country and say all of it out loud. He confronted Lady Constance in the great hall, and he did not do it privately. The council was there. The household was there. Harrison was there, standing near the door with the specific stillness of a young man who has begun to suspect something and does not want to be told. Constance stood in the center of the floor in gray, hands folded, and looked at the cut blanket, the ledger, the opened burial box, and the two old people sitting on a bench by the wall. This is theater, she said. Sit down. I will stand. Then stand. Nathaniel picked up the first item. The nursery burned from the window wall, not from the lamp. Every man who fought that fire told me otherwise for 20 years. Who instructed them? Smoke confuses people. It was chaos. The blanket was cut with a knife, half burned in the room, half in my daughter's grave, wrapped around river stones. He set it down. Chaos does not cut cloth in a straight line. Grief, said Lady Constance, does not think clearly. You are unwell, Nathaniel. You have been unwell for Samuel. The old guard stood up, shaking, and said it. The bundle, the east door, the words, the 8 minutes, the brother's house burning 2 weeks later. Lady Constance turned her head slightly. He is half blind. He was 51 then, Nathaniel said. Ruth. Ruth stood. She said it all again, plainly, in front of everyone, and she did not stumble once. And this time Lady Constance's composure moved. Not much. A tightening at the mouth. The barest thing. That woman kidnapped a royal child, she said. You have her confession in front of 40 witnesses. Arrest her and let us be finished with this. I paid her, Nathaniel said. Didn't I? You paid nothing. He picked up the ledger and read the line aloud. Charitable maintenance, fishing quarter. Asterisk, 19 years, written in her own hand, in the household accounts, under his seal. You paid a kidnapper every quarter for 19 years, he said, and wrote it in my books as charity. Explain that to this room. And Lady Constance made her mistake, the mistake that pride always makes eventually, which is to stop denying and start justifying. Because you were not fit, she said. The hall went absolutely silent. Say that again. You were not fit. Her voice had changed entirely. Cold, clear. 20 years of held pressure finally opening. You were 26 years old and you had a crown you did not earn and a wife who was already sick, in a country that was one bad season from tearing itself apart. And you had a daughter, a girl child, who would have been fought over, married off, used as a door into this house by every rival family on that river. She lifted her chin. I secured this kingdom. I gave it a line it could count on. I gave it my son. You gave it a lie. I gave it stability. And stability is worth more than truth to everyone in this hall except you. Lady Constance looked around the room, and here was the line the servants would repeat in the kitchens for the next 30 years. A crown does not go to the one who is born to it. It goes to the one who is willing to do what is necessary to hold it. I did what was necessary. You only grieved. King Nathaniel came down from the dais. He walked across the floor of his own great hall very slowly, and when he stopped in front of her, his voice was not loud at all. It was the quietest thing in the room. You did not secure a kingdom, he said. You burned a nursery with a child in it. Understand what that means. Not a plan, not a policy. You carried a baby out of a room, and then you set that room on fire so that no one would come looking for her. And you let her father hold a bundle of river stones and call it his daughter. Nathaniel, I am not finished. He did not raise his voice. He never once raised his voice. You watched me seal that wing. You watched me stop sleeping. You held my hand at my wife's funeral, and my wife died of what you did to her, and you knew that. And you held her hand too. The hall did not move. And then for 19 years you paid to keep my daughter hungry. Not hidden hungry. Findable and hungry and quiet. She swept a fish market this week for a coin. She dropped a jar because she had not eaten in 3 days. And I called her a thief in front of 100 people. Because you built a world in which I would. You did not do what was necessary. Constance, the king said. You did what was convenient. And you called it necessary for 20 years. Because the alternative was to look at yourself. Lady Constance's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Take her, Nathaniel said. Not to a room, to a cell, and bring me my daughter. If this story is moving you, subscribe now. The ending will change how you see everything. They found Grace sweeping the fish market. She was on the far side by the salt barrels, with a bundle of reeds in her hands. And when the royal guard came through the crowd, she assumed that they had come to arrest her after all. And she set the broom down carefully against the wall, because it belonged to the market and she did not want it broken. She was still holding out her wrists when the captain of the guard knelt, and the fish scales in the salt water in front of her. The whole market saw it. Nobody understood it. Neither did she. My lady, the captain said, the king is asking for you. The truth was made public 3 days later, in the courtyard, because Nathaniel refused to do it, behind doors. The physician's testimony was read. Samuel spoke. Ruth spoke. The ledger was read aloud, line by line, all 19 years of it. And the crowd made a low sound when the numbers were finished. That was not anger. Exactly, it was something heavier. The burial record was declared false and struck from the royal roll. Lady Constance was stripped of every title, every office, and every claim, and her son's name was removed from the line of succession And here is the detail people remembered. Look, Harrison was in the courtyard when it was read, and he did not fight it. He stood there white-faced through the whole thing, and afterward he walked to where Grace was sitting, and he stopped in front of her and could not think of one single word to say. "I didn't know," he finally managed. "I believe you," Grace said. "That is not enough." "No," she agreed, "but it is where you start." He went to see his mother in her cell that evening and every week after, which surprised everyone, and he never once asked for anything back. But the moment the country actually talks about the one the old women in the fishing quarter still tell happened before any of that, in a small chamber with the door closed, with only Ruth standing in the corner. The king had rehearsed what he would say. Kings do. He had rehearsed it for 2 nights, and he had gotten it very good, very careful, very kind. And then Grace walked in, and every word of it left him. They looked at each other for a long moment. "They told me some of it," she said. Her voice was not steady now. "On the way here, they told me..." She stopped and started again. "They said the king's daughter didn't die." "She didn't." "They said you were looking for..." "Her? I stopped looking a long time ago," Nathaniel said. "That was my failure. Not yours. Never yours." Grace's hands were shaking exactly as they had been shaking in the market, and she was looking at the floor, and she said the only thing she could think to say, which was, "And the king of the river country," a man who had not wept in front of another living person since he was 26 years old, put his hands over his face and broke completely apart. He crossed the room. He took her scarred right hand in both of his, and he turned it over, and he held her open palm against his own face where the burn was. And he stayed like that for a long time while she stood absolutely rigid, not knowing what to do, until something in her finally gave way. 3 days before the fire, he said, when he could speak, you reached for the lamp. Your mother had told you not to, and you did it anyway, because you were exactly that kind of child, and you were so angry about it afterward. You cried yourself to sleep on my chest. He was still holding her hand. I have hated this scar for 20 years. I thought it was the last thing I ever gave you. It's the only thing I had from before, Grace said. Nobody would tell me what it was. I used to make up stories about it. Tell me one. She laughed, wet, cracked, half a sob. I used to think my mother put it there so somebody would know me one day. Nathaniel closed his eyes. Somebody did, he said. Giarpaseth. Grace did not move into the palace all at once, and nobody made her. She spent the first months going back and forth between the high white rooms and the one-room house in the fishing quarter, until Ruth finally told her, with characteristic gentleness, to stop being ridiculous and choose a bed. Ruth was not punished. There was an argument in the council about it that lasted 4 days. The king ended it in one sentence. She is the reason there is anyone to punish anyone for. Ruth lives in the palace now, in a warm room near the kitchens, because she refused anything grander, and she is fierce and rude to the household staff and beloved by all of them. And Grace, the east wing, is open. She had it cleared out herself, and the nursery is a schoolroom now. 40 children from the fishing quarter, taught to read at the long tables, with the windows unshuttered and the sun coming all the way in. She goes down to the market twice a week, on foot, and the oil merchant David still cannot look at her without apologizing, and she still tells him to stop. She has not stopped giving away more than she keeps. She simply has more to give now. Her father sleeps through the night, most nights, and on the wall of the schoolroom, in the place where the fire started, there is a small carved leaf, no inscription. The children ask about it constantly, and Grace tells them a different answer every time, and none of the answers are true, and all of them are. Grace kept the brass leaf beside the schoolroom window. Sometimes children asked about it, and she told them it belonged to a story that began with a fire, crossed a market, and ended when a father finally learned to look beyond poverty and see the person standing before him with courage. The king who called a starving girl a thief had to lose everything he believed about that day to find the only thing he had ever truly wanted, and the scar he had spent 20 years grieving turned out not to be a wound at all, but the mark by which his own child was finally known. Thank you for joining us for this story. Subscribe to Untold African Folktales Stories and click the bell so you never miss a story. Watch our next story here.